My goodness, Sophie, my daughter-in-law Natalie said loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. That dress looks like it came from a donation bin. People will think we can't afford better. A few guests laughed. My son Ethan stared at his plate. Then Natalie pushed a stack of documents toward me. Just sign where I marked. Try not to make tonight any more embarrassing. I had barely touched the pen when a distinguished man approached our table. Natalie immediately straightened when she recognized the president of First Heritage Bank. But he walked past her and stopped beside me. "Mrs. Bernard," he said gravely, "why are documents from your family trust on this table?" Natalie's smile disappeared. Before I continue, please like and subscribe if you believe no one deserves to be judged by their clothes. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place, and where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I'd truly love to know. The dress, Natalie. Hated that morning, before the laughter and the papers and the bank president's unexpected question. I stood in front of my bedroom closet for nearly 10 minutes, trying to decide what to wear. My name is Sophie Bernard. I was 68 years old, widowed, and living alone in the same 2-story brick house in Columbus, Ohio, where my husband Michael and I had raised our only son. The house was quieter than it used to be, but I had never considered it lonely. Michael's books still lined the shelves in the den. His old coffee mug remained in the kitchen cabinet, chipped along the rim. Some mornings when rain touched the windows, I could almost hear him humming as he searched for his keys. I had lived there for 34 years. Every room carried a memory, and I wasn't ready to trade those memories for a smaller apartment simply because other people thought a woman my age needed less space. That morning, I reached past 2 newer dresses and removed a dark blue one from the back of the closet. The fabric was soft from years of careful washing. The sleeves ended just below my elbows, and the skirt fell neatly beneath my knees. There was no designer label inside it because I had made the dress myself. I sewed it 30 years earlier for my 25th wedding anniversary. At the time, Michael and I could have afforded something from a department store, but sewing had always been personal to me. My mother taught me when I was 11, guiding my hands across the fabric while reminding me that patience could turn ordinary cloth into something worth keeping. For my anniversary dress, I chose deep navy wool crepe and spent 3 evenings shaping the waist and stitching the narrow silver trim around the collar. I remembered stepping into our dining room wearing it while Michael waited beside a vase of white roses. He looked at me as though I had walked into the room wearing diamonds. "Sophie," he whispered, "you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." He said it without teasing, without hesitation, and without looking away. That was the kind of man Michael had been. He noticed the person before he noticed the price tag. Standing before the mirror that morning, I smoothed the skirt and saw small signs of age in both the dress and myself. A faint crease rested near the hem. Silver had spread through my short brown hair. The skin around my eyes had softened into lines that no cream could erase. Still, the dress fit. More importantly, it made me feel close to Michael. My phone rang on the dresser before I could fasten my pearl earrings. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. "Good morning, sweetheart," I answered. "Mom, you remember dinner tonight, right?" There was tension in his voice. Ethan had always spoken quickly when he was nervous, as though rushing through his words might prevent someone from questioning them. 7 o'clock at Hawthorne Grill, I said. I wrote it down. "Great." Natalie invited a few people connected to the boutique. Investors mostly. "We're celebrating a new beginning. I'm happy for you both." I meant it. Whatever difficulties existed between Natalie and me, I wanted my son's marriage to succeed. I wanted their business to work. I had spent most of my life hoping Ethan would find stability even after he became old enough to create it for himself. There was a short silence. "Mom, could you bring your driver's license?" I stopped fastening my earring. "Why would I need that for dinner? It's nothing serious. There may be a few family documents we need to update. What kind of documents? Just routine paperwork. Then why didn't you send them to Laura? Laura Mitchell had handled my legal affairs for more than a decade. Ethan knew that I never signed a financial document without asking her to review it. He cleared his throat. Natalie's business attorney prepared everything. We don't need to make this complicated. I didn't realize my identification was part of celebrating her boutique. Mom, please. His tone grew sharper, then immediately softened. I'm under a lot of pressure. Can you just bring it and trust me? Those last two words stayed with me. Trust me. People rarely asked for trust when they were prepared to offer clarity. Nevertheless, I said, I'll bring my license. Thank you. And maybe wear something nice? Hawthorne is fairly upscale. The comment stung more than it should have. I know what kind of restaurant Hawthorne is. I didn't mean anything by it. Of course you didn't. He ended the call after promising to see me at 7. I sat on the edge of my bed, still holding the phone. There had been a time when Ethan called simply to ask how I was feeling. After Michael died, he came by every Sunday. He repaired a loose porch railing, changed light bulbs I could not reach, and once drove across town in a snowstorm because my furnace made a strange noise. But during the previous year, almost every call had included a request. A loan, a signature, an introduction, a favor. Dinner invitations had become even rarer. Natalie had celebrated her birthday without me. She held a Christmas cocktail party and claimed there was not enough room for older relatives. When Ethan received a promotion, I learned about the celebration from a photograph online. Yet now on the evening when investors would be present, they suddenly wanted me there, and they wanted my identification. I opened the small drawer beside my bed and placed my driver's license inside my purse. Then I added a folded handkerchief that had belonged to my mother and the silver compact Michael gave me during our 10th anniversary. I was about to close my purse when my phone chimed. A voicemail notification appeared from a number I recognized, First Heritage Bank. I had banked there for decades, but no meeting was scheduled that day. Richard Whitmore's office normally contacted me through his assistant, not through a general customer service number. I pressed play. Good morning, Mrs. Bernard. This is Melissa Grant from the Verification Department at First Heritage Bank. We are contacting you regarding a personal guarantee submitted in connection with a commercial loan application. Before the file can proceed, we need to confirm your authorization. Please call us at your earliest convenience. The message ended. I listened to it again. Personal guarantee, commercial loan, authorization. I had submitted nothing. I had authorized nothing. And no one at the bank should have been reviewing my signature on a commercial loan. My first instinct was to call immediately. My finger hovered over the number, but then I remembered Ethan's strained voice and his insistence that I bring identification to dinner. If I called the bank, someone might contact him before I had the chance to see his face and hear his explanation for myself. Ethan had become skilled at repeating Natalie's version of events. On the telephone, he could avoid my eyes. Across a table, he had never been able to lie to me without touching the side of his neck. I saved the voicemail and slipped the phone into my purse. For the first time, the dinner invitation no longer felt like an attempt to include me. It felt like an appointment I had not agreed to attend. I looked at my reflection one last time. The navy dress Natalie would later despise rested smoothly against my shoulders. Michael had loved me in that dress. Whatever waited at Hawthorne Grill, I decided I would walk into that restaurant carrying the dignity he had always seen in me. And I would not sign a single page until I understood why my own son was afraid to tell me the truth. The family I kept rescuing. After hearing the voicemail, I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about how often Ethan's problems had arrived disguised as temporary emergencies. It had not always been that way. As a boy, Ethan was thoughtful and affectionate. He used to leave wildflowers on my sewing table and wait for me to notice them. When Michael worked late, Ethan helped me set the dinner table, even though he usually placed the forks on the wrong side. At 17, he spent an entire summer saving for his first car because Michael insisted he pay for half of it himself. He needs to understand what things cost, Michael told me. At the time, I thought Michael was being too strict. I often slipped Ethan $20 when his father wasn't looking. That was one of the differences between us. Michael believed love sometimes required letting a person struggle. I believed a mother's job was to soften every hard place her child might fall. After Michael died, that instinct became stronger. Ethan was 35, then married to Natalie for just over a year. For the first few months after the funeral, he called me every evening. He came by on Sundays and checked the furnace, the gutters, and the locks. Once during a February snowstorm, he drove across Columbus because I mentioned hearing a strange sound from the basement. It turned out to be a loose vent. We laughed about it while drinking coffee in the kitchen, and for a while I believed grief had brought us closer. Then the requests began. The first involved an old student loan Ethan had neglected. He said the monthly payments were preventing him and Natalie from building a future. He was embarrassed to ask for help, and I was moved by what seemed like honesty. I paid the remaining balance. Ethan hugged me and promised it was the last time he would ever need financial help. 6 months later, he and Natalie found a large house in a new development outside the city. It had 4 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and a stone fireplace Natalie called essential for entertaining. They could afford the mortgage, Ethan explained, but not the full down payment. "We're not asking you to give us the money," Natalie said over dinner. "Think of it as an early inheritance." I disliked the phrase, but Ethan looked so hopeful that I transferred the money. They thanked me warmly. Natalie even called me Mom for 2 weeks. After they moved in, however, the invitations became less frequent. Natalie said their new social circle consisted mostly of young professionals and business owners. She suggested I might feel uncomfortable around them. The truth was simpler. Natalie felt uncomfortable around me. She believed I was an ordinary widow living on Social Security, a modest pension, and the life insurance Michael had left behind. I never corrected her. I did not want to be welcomed because of a bank balance. What Natalie never understood was that Michael and I had spent decades building something beyond the little sewing shop and repair business people associated with us. We had been careful, patient, and private. Our son knew there were family investments, but he did not understand their full size or structure. That secrecy had been deliberate. Michael and I agreed that Ethan should build his own life before learning what might eventually come to him. We had seen money ruin families. We had watched children become strangers while their parents were still alive, measuring love in property, and anticipated inheritance. After Michael's death, I continued honoring that agreement. At first, Natalie's comments about my appearance were subtle. She once offered to take me shopping because my clothes looked a little dated. Another time, she suggested I color my hair before a family photograph because the silver made me look tired. I tried to laugh. Then she began making those comments in front of other people. At Thanksgiving, I wore a brown cardigan I had knitted myself. Natalie touched the sleeve and said, "Sophie Vintage only works when it's intentional." Everyone at the table heard her. Ethan lowered his eyes and carved the turkey. On my birthday, Natalie gave me a gift card to an expensive clothing store. When I thanked her, she said, "Now you won't have an excuse." I looked at Ethan, expecting him to say something. Instead, he asked me to ignore it. "You know how Natalie is," he whispered later. "She doesn't always hear how she sounds." But Natalie knew exactly how she sounded. She simply believed keeping Ethan happy meant I would continue accepting it. And I did. I told myself that answering back would create conflict in their marriage. I told myself Ethan was under pressure at work. I told myself Natalie had grown up differently and would become kinder with age. What I refused to tell myself was that my silence had become permission. Nearly a year before the dinner at Hawthorne Grill, Ethan came to my house carrying a folder. We sat at the kitchen table while he explained that he wanted to help manage my affairs. "You're healthy now?" he said. But what if something happens? I have Laura, I reminded him. A lawyer isn't family. No, but she understands the trust. His fingers moved to the side of his neck. That was Ethan's tell. He had touched that same place as a child after breaking a lamp and blaming the dog. He slid a document toward me. It's only a power of attorney. If you're ever sick, I'll be able to pay bills and handle basic decisions. I read the first page. The authority it granted was broad, immediate, and not limited to illness. This gives you access now, I said. His face reddened. That's standard language. Laura can prepare one with the limits I want. Natalie's attorney already did the work. I closed the folder. Then Natalie's attorney wasted his time. Ethan stood so quickly that his chair scraped the floor. I'm trying to protect you. Then you should be pleased that I read before signing. He left angry. That evening, Natalie sent me a long message accusing me of humiliating him and treating him like a thief. I never showed the message to anyone. 2 weeks later, Ethan apologized. He said the idea had been poorly presented and promised not to mention it again. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Now sitting in my bedroom with the bank's voicemail saved on my phone, I wondered whether the power of attorney had been their first attempt rather than their last. I opened my purse and removed my driver's license. For several seconds, I considered leaving it at home. Then I put it back. If Ethan and Natalie expected me to prove my identity, I wanted to see what they placed in front of me. But I made one decision before leaving the bedroom. They would not receive my signature. Not on a napkin, not on a receipt, and certainly not on a financial document presented between dinner and dessert. At 6:15, I put on my coat and stood before the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me did not appear wealthy or powerful. She looked like a widow in an old navy dress carrying a sensible black purse. That was probably the woman Natalie expected. As I locked the front door behind me, I wondered whether my son still remembered the mother who had paid his debts, helped buy his house, and forgiven every silence. More importantly, I wondered what he would do when that mother finally said no. A celebration built on a lie. Hawthorne Grill stood near the center of downtown Columbus, behind a row of carefully trimmed trees wrapped in white lights. Its stone entrance, brass-framed doors, and discreet valet service made it popular with executives who wanted to be seen without appearing to seek attention. Michael and I had eaten there twice. The first time was after we purchased our 5th apartment building. The second was on our 40th anniversary. Both evenings, he ordered the least expensive steak on the menu and spent 20 minutes pretending he had not noticed the prices. When I arrived shortly before 7, a young valet opened my car door and offered his hand. Welcome to Hawthorne Grill, ma'am. Thank you. His kindness calmed me. It was a small reminder that courtesy cost nothing regardless of what someone wore. Inside, crystal lights glowed above dark wooden tables. Soft piano music floated through the dining room, accompanied by the quiet rhythm of glasses and silverware. I gave Ethan's name to the hostess. Mr. Bernard's party is in the garden room, she said. She guided me past the main dining area toward a private section enclosed by glass panels. Through them, I saw Ethan standing beside Natalie and several people I did not recognize. Natalie wore a fitted cream-colored dress with a gold belt. Her dark hair had been arranged in polished waves, and a designer handbag rested prominently on the chair beside her. She looked elegant, expensive, and completely at home. Then she saw me. Her smile tightened. For a moment, her gaze traveled from my silver hair to my navy dress and practical black shoes. She recovered before the hostess opened the door, but not quickly enough to hide her disappointment. Sophie, she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. You made it. You invited me. Yes, of course. Ethan approached and hugged me. His arms felt stiff. Hi, Mom. When he pulled away, his eyes dropped briefly to my dress. He glanced at Natalie before looking back at me. I thought you might wear something newer. This is appropriate for dinner. I didn't say it wasn't. Natalie gave a quiet sigh. We don't have time to discuss it now. Everyone is already here. She led me toward this table and began introducing the guests. There was Kevin Doyle, a commercial real estate broker, Melissa Grant, an interior designer, and Paul and Rebecca Lawson, a married couple considering an investment in Natalie's boutique. This is Ethan's mother, Sophie, Natalie said. She lives by herself in the old family house and enjoys sewing. It was not exactly untrue, but the dismissive tone reduced my entire life to a lonely hobby. Rebecca smiled politely. How lovely. Do you still sew often whenever something is worth making? Natalie laughed before I could say more. Sophie has never been interested in modern fashion. She prefers things from another era. Her eyes moved to my dress. I pretended not to notice. Natalie directed me to the chair farthest from the center of the table. From there, I was partly hidden behind a tall flower arrangement. Ethan sat beside his wife near the investors, leaving an empty seat between us. The arrangement told me everything Natalie would not say aloud. I had been invited because they needed something from me, not because they wanted me included. A waiter offered me wine. I asked for sparkling water instead. I wanted my mind clear. Once everyone was seated, Ethan lifted his glass. Thank you all for coming. Tonight marks an important step for Bellamy and Rowe. Everyone applauded. Natalie leaned toward Paul and Rebecca. We're creating more than a boutique. It will be a complete luxury experience for women who understand quality. She described private fitting rooms, imported furniture, exclusive launch events, and personalized styling appointments. A leather folder passed around the table containing renderings of the storefront. The proposed location occupied a renovated building in the Short North Arts District. I recognized the address immediately. The monthly lease alone would be considerable. It looks impressive, I said. Natalie gave me a surprised glance as if I had commented on something beyond my understanding. It will be, she replied. Once the financing is finalized. Ethan shifted in his chair. I noticed the wording. Finalized, I asked. I thought tonight was a celebration. It is, Natalie said quickly. The bank has essentially approved everything. Essentially, Paul Lawson looked toward Ethan. I understood the commercial loan was ready to close. It is, Ethan said. There are just a few routine signatures left. His fingers touched the side of his neck. I lowered my eyes to my water glass before anyone noticed my expression. Natalie resumed describing the opening. She spoke about champagne local influencers and a private preview for selected clients. Everything sounded certain, even though the money financing it had not yet been released. During the main course, a photographer arrived. Natalie stood at the head of the table and gathered the investors around her. Let's get one with the whole team, she said. I started to rise. Natalie raised one hand. Actually, Sophie, would you mind taking the picture first? Then the photographer can take another. The photographer is already here, I said. Yes, but this first one is for the business page. Ethan looked uncomfortable. Mom, we'll get a family photo afterward. I slowly sat down again. Natalie posed between Ethan and the Lawsons. Every face turned toward the camera except mine. The flash illuminated the room. When they returned to their seats, Natalie did not request the promised family photograph. I concentrated on cutting my salmon into small pieces while she continued discussing money. Beside her plate rested a thick, cream-colored envelope. The logo printed in the upper corner belonged to a law office I did not recognize. I leaned slightly forward. Who is David Mercer? Natalie placed her hand over the envelope. Our business attorney. Why is your business attorney preparing family documents? Her smile vanished for a fraction of a second. He specializes in several areas. Laura Mitchell handles my legal affairs. This doesn't concern your personal affairs, Natalie said. Then why did Ethan ask me to bring identification? The conversation around the table stopped. Ethan set down his fork. Mom, we agreed not to make this complicated. No, you told me not to make it complicated. That isn't the same as an agreement. Natalie smiled at the investors, but anger sharpened her eyes. Sophie gets anxious about paperwork, she explained. At her age, unfamiliar documents can feel overwhelming. Heat rose in my face. I had managed business accounts before Natalie finished high school, yet she spoke as though I could no longer understand a bank statement. Paul Lawson glanced down at his plate. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Natalie changed the subject, but the atmosphere never fully recovered. A few minutes later, the waiter approached to refill my water. As he leaned beside me, he lowered his voice. Ma'am, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but the gentleman at the table near the window seems to recognize you. I turned slightly. Across the main dining room sat 3 men in dark suits. One had silver hair and a familiar profile, though a column partly blocked my view. He was listening to his companions, but his attention kept returning to our table. Before I could see him clearly, Natalie tapped her glass with a spoon. Everyone, she announced before dessert, there's one final piece of business we need to complete. She lifted the cream-colored envelope and placed it directly in front of me. Ethan touched the side of his neck again, and the silver-haired man at the distant table stopped speaking. People will think we can't afford better. Natalie rested one hand on the cream-colored envelope as though it contained the final piece of a prize she had already won. Before we move on to dessert, she said, Sophie needs to help us complete a few formalities. The other guests looked toward me. I had spent most of the evening trying not to become the center of attention. Natalie had seated me behind the flowers, excluded me from the photographs, and reduced my life to a harmless sewing hobby. Now that she needed my signature, she wanted every eye in the room fixed on me. Perhaps we should discuss family paperwork privately, I said. There's nothing private about it. She smiled at the Lawsons. They already understand the structure of the financing. I looked at Ethan. Do they understand it better than I do? His hand moved toward his neck. Mom, please don't turn this into an argument. I asked a question. Natalie sighed dramatically and looked down at my dress. My goodness, Sophie, we've spent months preparing for this night, and you arrived looking like that. Could you at least try not to make the paperwork difficult too? The room became quiet. I glanced down at the navy fabric. Looking like what? You know exactly what I mean. No, Natalie, explain it. Ethan whispered her name as a warning, but she ignored him. That dress looks like it came from a donation bin, she said. People will think we can't afford better. Her voice was loud enough to reach the neighboring tables. Kevin Doyle gave an uncomfortable cough. Rebecca Lawson stared at her wine glass. The interior designer forced a thin smile, perhaps unsure whether Natalie was making a joke. Then Paul Lawson laughed. It was only a short, awkward sound, but it cut through me. I turned to Ethan. He had heard every word. He had seen the way his wife looked at me. Yet he stared at his plate as though the pattern on the china required his full attention. I waited. A mother should not have to beg her son to defend her, but in that moment, I silently begged anyway. Ethan finally raised his head. Natalie, that's enough. Relief started to rise inside me until he added, We don't need this tonight. Not don't speak to my mother that way. Not apologize. Only, we don't need this tonight. The problem in his mind was not Natalie's cruelty. It was the inconvenience of my reaction. I made this dress myself, I said quietly. Natalie blinked, then laughed. Well, that explains it. This time, no one joined her. I touched the silver trim at my collar. For one painful second, I saw Michael standing beside white roses, looking at me as if I were the finest thing in the world. Natalie saw old fabric. Michael had seen me. Mom, Ethan said, "Can we just finish what we came here to do?" What exactly did I come here to do? Natalie pulled the papers from the envelope and arranged them neatly in front of me. Several pages had bright yellow tabs attached near the signature lines. "You're helping your family," she replied. I did not touch the documents. By doing what? Giving Ethan permission to manage a portion of the family assets connected to his future inheritance. Ethan doesn't have a future inheritance he can manage in the present. Natalie's mouth tightened. It's temporary. The bank needs additional assurance before releasing the funds. Once the boutique becomes profitable, the guarantee will be removed. Paul Lawson leaned back in his chair. That was the first time Natalie had openly admitted that my assets were connected to their financing. "How much are you borrowing?" I asked. Ethan answered too quickly. "The final number hasn't been settled." I turned to him. "How much?" "About $2 million, Natalie interrupted. 2.4, including the contingency reserve. But you're making it sound much larger than it is. $2.4 million is exactly as large as it sounds. The store will generate enough revenue to cover the loan. Then why does the bank need my guarantee? Natalie glanced at the investors. Because banks are conservative. You understand that? I understood banks better than she knew, but I kept that thought to myself. She uncapped a black pen and placed it beside my hand. Your driver's license. I opened my purse, but did not remove it. Why? The signatures need to be witnessed. By whom? David's office will complete that part. David Mercer isn't here. He doesn't need to be. I looked at Ethan again. A line of perspiration had formed near his hairline despite the cool room. Have you read these papers? Most of them? Most Natalie's attorney explained everything. That wasn't my question. His eyes moved away from mine. I drew the stack toward me. Natalie relaxed, believing she had won. The tabs show where to sign. I ignored the tabs and began with the first page. The document was not a simple authorization. It was a personal guarantee linked to the commercial loan for Bellamy and Rowe Holdings. Several sections referred to assets controlled by the Bernard Family Trust. I turned the page. The language granted the lender rights against specific properties if the business defaulted. The listed collateral included 3 apartment buildings, 2 commercial properties, investment accounts, and my home. The home where I had lived for 34 years. The home where Michael's books still stood on the shelves. My eyes moved slowly across the valuation schedule. The figures were accurate enough to trouble me. Someone had access to information that neither Natalie nor Ethan should have possessed. At the bottom of one page, I found a declaration stating that I had reviewed the commercial plan and voluntarily agreed to pledge trust assets. It included a reference to a preliminary electronic authorization. The voicemail from First Heritage Bank echoed in my mind. A personal guarantee submitted in connection with a commercial loan application. I turned another page and found a copy of what appeared to be my signature. It was close, but not correct. The capital S leaned too far to the right. The final stroke in Bernard curved upward, while mine had always ended in a straight line. Someone had copied my name without understanding the way I wrote it. I felt no panic. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Natalie mistook my silence for confusion. If the language is too complicated, I can summarize it, she offered. You already did. There's no meaningful risk. Then, use your own assets. Her face hardened. We have invested everything we have, and now you want everything I have. Ethan reached across the table. Mom, no one is trying to take anything from you. I turned the page so he could see the line containing my forged signature. Did you know this was already submitted? His face lost color. Before he could answer, Natalie pushed the pen closer. "Just sign where I marked," she said. "Try not to make tonight any more embarrassing." I picked up the pen. Natalie smiled. Ethan exhaled. The investors watched in silence, but instead of signing, I held the pen above the false signature and looked directly into my daughter-in-law's eyes. "Tell me who wrote my name here." Natalie's smile froze. Behind her, the silver-haired man from the other table rose from his chair and began walking toward us. "The bank president said my name." Natalie followed my gaze and turned toward the man approaching our table. The change in her expression was immediate. Her irritation disappeared beneath a polished smile. She straightened in her chair, adjusted the gold belt at her waist, and quietly moved the cream-colored envelope closer to herself. I finally recognized the silver-haired man. Richard Whitmore had been president of First Heritage Bank for 12 years. Michael and I had known him long before that, when he was still a young commercial loan officer with inexpensive suits and a habit of carrying 3 pens in his shirt pocket. Time had added silver to his hair and authority to his movements, but his attentive gray eyes had not changed. Natalie rose before he reached us. "Mr. Whitmore," she said brightly. "What a wonderful surprise." "I'm Natalie Bernard, Bellamy and Rowe Holdings." Richard gave her a polite nod, but did not stop beside her. He walked around the table and came directly to me. "Mrs. Bernard," he said, his voice warm but surprised. "I didn't know you were dining here tonight." Every conversation at our table stopped. I set the pen down. "Good evening, Richard." He touched my shoulder lightly. "How have you been?" "Well enough until a few minutes ago." His eyes moved from my face to the papers spread across the table. "I was going to call you tomorrow about the Community Housing Committee," he continued. "We also need to confirm the agenda for next week's trust meeting." Natalie's smile weakened. "Trust meeting," Rebecca Lawson repeated. Richard glanced toward her, then back to me. "The Bernard Family Trust holds several long-standing accounts with First Heritage." I watched Ethan's expression shift from embarrassment to confusion. He knew a trust existed, but hearing the bank president speak about it with such familiarity unsettled him. Natalie attempted to regain control. "Mr. Whitmore, we were actually discussing the financing for my boutique. I'm sure you've seen the application. I've seen the file." "Wonderful. Then perhaps you can reassure Sophie that everything is perfectly routine." Richard did not answer. His attention had settled on the number printed in the upper corner of the first page. He leaned closer, and the warmth left his face. "May I see that document?" Natalie placed her hand on the papers. "It's private family business." Richard looked at me rather than her. "Mrs. Bernard." "You may read it." Natalie's fingers tightened. "Sophie, I don't think—" "Remove your hand from my documents." My voice was quiet, but something in it made her obey. Richard picked up the first page and read quickly. He turned to the signature page, then examined the attached property schedule. "Where did you get this copy?" he asked Natalie. "Our attorney prepared it." "Which attorney?" "David Mercer." Richard's jaw tightened. "Mr. Mercer is not listed as counsel for the trust. He represents Bellamy and Rowe. That does not authorize him to prepare documents on behalf of Mrs. Bernard." Ethan leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, this is only a temporary guarantee. We were told the bank needed my mother's signature before the loan could close." Richard looked directly at him. "The bank needs a valid guarantee from the lawful trustee. It does not need a signature obtained during dinner without independent counsel." A faint murmur passed around the table. Paul Lawson stopped looking amused. Natalie crossed her arms. "No one is forcing her." Sophie agreed to help us. "No," I said. "I agreed to attend dinner." Richard turned another page. His expression became even more serious. "This file is currently on administrative hold." Natalie stared at him. "That can't be correct. We were told approval was imminent. Conditional approval was discussed. Final approval was never issued. But the underwriting requirements were satisfied." "Not all of them." Richard placed one finger beside the signature I had found. "Our verification department contacted Mrs. Bernard this morning because the preliminary authorization could not be authenticated." The room seemed to contract around us. Ethan turned to Natalie. "You said the bank had accepted it." Natalie's eyes flashed. "They had no reason not to." "I never provided it," I said. Richard looked at me. "To be absolutely clear, did you sign or electronically authorize any guarantee connected to Bellamy and Rowe Holdings number? Did you give your son or daughter-in-law permission to use assets held by the Bernard Family Trust as collateral? No. Did you authorize anyone to obtain financial information from the trust? No." Each answer made Natalie's face paler. She reached for the documents again. "This is a misunderstanding. Let me take those and I'll have our attorney correct whatever technical issue." Richard moved the papers beyond her reach. "No one will alter anything. It's my company's application. It contains another person's financial information and a disputed signature." Natalie's voice rose. "Are you accusing me of fraud in front of my investors?" "I'm stating that the bank has an obligation to preserve the documents and investigate how they were created." Kevin Doyle quietly pushed his chair back from the table. Melissa Grant avoided Natalie's eyes. Paul whispered something to Rebecca. The confident gathering Natalie had arranged was beginning to collapse around her. Ethan looked at me with an expression I could not read. "Mom, I swear I didn't sign your name." I wanted to believe him, but I remembered his fingers touching his neck. I remembered the power of attorney document he had brought to my kitchen. I remembered every request disguised as an emergency. "Then explain why you brought me here," I said. He opened his mouth, but produced no answer. Natalie rose abruptly. "This has gone far enough." Sophie is confused. She heard the amount of the loan and panicked because she doesn't understand commercial financing. Richard's gaze hardened. "Mrs. Bernard has negotiated commercial financing for longer than you've been in business." Natalie stared at him. I heard Rebecca Lawson inhale sharply. Richard continued. "She is not confused, and she is not merely a beneficiary of the Bernard Family Trust. She is its controlling trustee." The silence that followed felt heavier than the humiliation I had endured minutes earlier. Natalie looked from Richard to me. "That's impossible," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Because of my dress." Her lips parted, but no words came. Richard took out his phone and made a brief call. Within minutes, the restaurant manager arrived with a security officer. Richard instructed them to place the original documents in a sealed envelope and record who had handled them. Natalie protested that he had no right to take her paperwork. He calmly explained that with my permission, the documents would be preserved as evidence connected to the disputed bank submission. I gave that permission. The security officer sealed the pages while everyone watched. The yellow signature tabs remained visible through the clear protective sleeve. Natalie stood motionless beside the table, stripped of every advantage she thought she possessed. Her investors had stopped speaking to her. Ethan looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Richard handed me his business card, though I had his private number. "Mrs. Bernard, we should meet with Laura Mitchell first thing tomorrow morning. Until then, please do not sign anything or communicate with anyone claiming to represent this loan." "I won't." Natalie let out a bitter laugh. Of course she won't. She would rather destroy her son's future than risk $1. I slowly stood and collected my purse. This was never about $1. I looked at the forged signature inside the sealed envelope. It was about whether you believed I had the right to decide what happened to my own name. Richard offered me his arm, but before leaving, I faced Ethan one more time. "Tomorrow morning, the bank will begin asking questions. Tonight is your last chance to decide whether I hear the truth from my son or from an investigator." Ethan's face turned gray. Natalie gripped the back of her chair. and for the first time that evening, neither of them had anything to say. What Michael and I never told them. Richard escorted me through the restaurant while the people at Natalie's table watched in silence. The same guests who had barely noticed me when I arrived now followed every step I took. Nothing about my appearance had changed. I still wore the navy dress Natalie considered embarrassing. My shoes were still practical, my purse was still old, and my silver hair had not suddenly become fashionable. The only difference was that a powerful man had spoken my name with respect. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. Richard waited beside me while the valet brought my car. "Are you all right to drive?" he asked. "I'm hurt, Richard. I'm not helpless. I never thought you were." That simple answer nearly broke the composure I had maintained all evening. He promised to have the disputed loan file secured before leaving the restaurant. We agreed to meet Laura at the bank at 9 the following morning. As I drove home, I thought about the secret Michael and I had kept from Ethan and how that secret had allowed Natalie to mistake discretion for poverty. Michael and I had not begun with wealth. When we married, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. The bedroom window rattled whenever a delivery truck passed, and the kitchen was so narrow that Michael and I could not open the oven and refrigerator at the same time. I repaired clothing for neighbors at our dining table. At first, I charged $2 for a hem and $5 to replace a zipper. Within 3 years, I had enough customers to rent a narrow storefront near East Main Street. I called it Sophie's Alterations. The shop was never glamorous. It smelled of steam, fabric chalk, and coffee. I worked 6 days a week, often bringing Ethan with me when he was small. He played beneath the cutting table while I repaired wedding dresses, school uniforms, and work jackets. Michael worked for a residential repair company. He could fix nearly anything, but his true gift was seeing potential in things other people had abandoned. One afternoon, he brought me to a neglected 4-unit building with boarded windows and weeds growing through the front steps. "It's ugly," I said. "It's tired," he corrected. "There's a difference." The owner wanted to sell quickly. Michael believed we could repair the building ourselves and rent the apartments at reasonable prices. We used almost all our savings for the down payment. For 8 months, Michael worked at the property after finishing his regular job. I handled invoices, permits, budgets, and loan payments. On weekends, I painted walls and cleaned floors while Ethan sat nearby with crayons and sandwiches. When the final apartment was rented, the building produced only a modest profit. But instead of spending the money, we saved it. 4 years later, we bought a second property, then a third. There was no sudden fortune and no miraculous investment. Every building came from years of labor, careful borrowing, and countless evenings at the kitchen table. Michael inspected roofs and furnaces. I negotiated with banks, reviewed leases, and tracked every dollar. People often assumed Michael managed the business because he was the husband. He never allowed that assumption to stand. Sophie knows the numbers he would tell bankers. If she says the deal doesn't work, it doesn't work. By the time Ethan left for college, Michael and I owned several apartment buildings and 2 small commercial properties. Later, we created the Bernard Family Trust to protect the assets and ensure the rental homes remained responsibly managed. We did not become wealthy by pushing vulnerable tenants out or doubling rents overnight. Our properties were profitable because we maintained them, chose reliable managers, and kept good tenants for years. That mattered to me. The trust was not merely a pile of money. It represented homes, jobs, and promises made to people who had placed their confidence in us. Richard first entered our lives when he was a young commercial loan officer at First Heritage Bank. Other bankers dismissed our early proposals because Michael wore work boots and I arrived carrying figures in a handmade canvas folder. Richard read every page. He asked difficult questions, but he listened to the answers. Over the years, our professional relationship became a friendship based on trust. During an economic downturn, First Heritage faced a period of uncertainty. Several major clients moved their deposits and rumors spread through the local business community. Michael and I chose to stay. We kept the trust's accounts at First Heritage and provided funding for a housing partnership that helped repair neglected rental units. Our decision did not save the bank by itself, but Richard never forgot that we remained loyal when leaving would have been easier. That was why he knew my name. It was not because I enjoyed special treatment or demanded attention. It was because we had worked together for nearly 30 years. After Michael died, I became the controlling trustee. Every major decision required my authorization. Laura managed the legal structure, Richard supervised the banking relationship, and a professional property team handled daily operations. I remained involved in every important decision. Natalie knew none of that. Ethan knew more, but not everything. He understood that his father had owned rental properties, yet Michael and I never revealed the full value of the portfolio. We had watched inheritance poison families we knew. Adult children counted their parents' assets before the funeral. Siblings stopped speaking over houses, jewelry, and bank accounts. Michael refused to let Ethan grow up waiting for money he had not earned. "Let him build a life," Michael often said. "Whatever comes later should be a gift, not a plan." I agreed. Even after Michael's death, I continued living simply. I drove the same dependable car and repaired my clothes instead of replacing them. The trust's income supported property maintenance community projects and my needs, but I had no desire to advertise it. That night, however, I questioned whether secrecy had protected Ethan or merely left space for resentment. Natalie believed I was withholding a small inheritance while her business struggled. She had no idea she was attempting to risk the homes of dozens of families and the work Michael and I had built over a lifetime. When I reached home, the porch light illuminated the familiar brick walls. I sat in the parked car for several minutes, unable to go inside. My phone showed 4 missed calls from Ethan and 3 from Natalie. There was also a text from my son. "Mom, please call me before you speak to the bank tomorrow. Natalie says there's an explanation. I read it twice. Not, I'm sorry, not, are you all right?" He was still protecting her explanation before asking how deeply they had hurt me. I entered the house and locked the door. In the hallway mirror, I saw myself in the dress Michael had loved. For years, I believed keeping quiet about our money would show me who valued me without it. That evening, I received my answer. But one question remained. Had Ethan been deceived by his wife? Or had my own son knowingly brought me to that restaurant because he believed embarrassment would make me surrender? By morning, I intended to find out. My son chose his side. At 10:30 that night, someone knocked on my front door. I did not need to look through the window to know who it was. Ethan always knocked 3 times in the same rhythm he had used since he was a teenager. "Mommy called. Please open the door." Natalie stood behind him on the porch. Her arms were crossed over her coat, and her expression carried none of the panic she had shown at the restaurant. She looked angry now, as if I had embarrassed her rather than uncovered a forged signature. I opened the door, but did not invite them farther than the living room. Ethan began before he had removed his coat. "You left without letting us explain. I gave you an opportunity at the restaurant." Richard made it impossible to talk. "Mr. Whitmore protected documents connected to my trust." Natalie stepped around Ethan. "He humiliated us in front of our investors." "You humiliated yourself." Her eyes narrowed. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" I almost laughed, but the accusation hurt too much. I had spent the evening watching my son refuse to defend me. Nothing about that brought me pleasure. "Sit down," I said. "If there is an explanation, give it now." Ethan lowered himself onto the sofa. Natalie remained standing until she realized I would not be intimidated, then sat beside him. I took the armchair facing them. "How much did you know about the guarantee?" Ethan rubbed his palms together. Natalie told me the bank needed additional collateral. That was not my question. His fingers moved toward his neck. I knew your signature was required. Did you know my house was listed? He looked at Natalie before answering. I knew some trust properties were involved. My house, Ethan. Yes. The word landed with terrible softness. I had expected denial, confusion, or outrage. Instead, my son admitted that he knew they intended to place my home at risk. Why didn't you tell me before tonight? Because you would have said no without listening. That was my right. We weren't going to lose the house, he insisted. The guarantee was temporary. Once the boutique opened and revenue started coming in, the bank would release your assets. You cannot promise what a bank will do. Natalie's attorney said the structure was safe. Did Laura review it? No. Did Richard approve it? We thought he would. Did I approve it? He lowered his eyes. No. Natalie leaned forward. This is exactly why we didn't explain every detail. You hear words like collateral and immediately assume disaster. Business involves risk. Then risk your own property. We already have. That does not give you the right to risk mine. She gave Ethan a sharp look, silently ordering him to continue. He took a breath. Mom, I didn't know the signature had been submitted. I swear. Natalie told me the bank had a preliminary authorization on file, but I thought it came from an earlier document you signed. What earlier document? The estate update from 2 years ago. That document had nothing to do with your business. I understand that now. Natalie interrupted. No one forged anything. The bank's electronic system must have attached the wrong signature. I stared at her. Richard said the authorization could not be authenticated. Banks make mistakes. Then why did the copy contain accurate details about properties you should not know about? For the first time, she hesitated. David obtained public records. The investment accounts are not public. Her mouth tightened. Ethan turned toward her. Natalie, where did those numbers come from? I don't know. The financial team handled the file. Which financial team? She stood abruptly. I am not going to sit here while the two of you interrogate me like a criminal. No one called you a criminal, I said. But someone wrote my name on a document I never authorized. She pointed toward me. After everything Ethan has done for you, you're treating him like a thief. I looked at my son. What has he done that gives him ownership of my signature? Ethan flinched. Mom, please. I made a mistake by not telling you everything, but I didn't sign your name. I wanted to believe him. He was still my child, no matter how old he was. I could remember him at 6 running into my sewing shop with a scraped knee. I could remember how tightly he held my hand at Michael's funeral. But memory could not erase the man sitting before me. What are you asking me to do now? I said. Ethan looked relieved, mistaking the question for surrender. Call Richard in the morning. Tell him there was a misunderstanding. Ask him to reopen the loan review. And the guarantee you could sign the correct version with Laura present. Natalie sat beside him again. If the bank delays much longer, we'll lose the lease. The Lawsons may withdraw. Everything we invested will be gone. I studied Ethan's face. Even after seeing the forged signature, even after hearing Richard confirm that the bank had frozen the loan, my son still wanted me to place my home and trust at risk. For once, he said, I need you to believe in me. I paid your student debt. That's not the same. I helped buy your house. That was years ago. I supported every new beginning you told me would be the last time you needed help. Natalie's voice turned cold. So this is punishment because we have our own lives, no. This is the first time I'm refusing to let your plans become my obligation. Ethan stood and paced toward the fireplace. If you don't sign, my marriage could fall apart. The words stopped me. He was not asking me to protect a business. He was asking me to purchase peace between him and his wife with my security. And if I do sign, I said, what part of me must fall apart instead. He turned away. That was his answer. I retrieved my phone and wrote a short email to Laura while they watched. Effective immediately suspend Ethan Bernard's informational access to all trust matters. No financial information is to be released without my direct written authorization. I pressed send. Ethan stared at me. What did you just do? I removed the limited access you had to trust reports. You can't make decisions like that because you're angry. I am the controlling trustee. Those decisions belong to me. Natalie rose slowly. You've been hiding money from your own son while pretending to be poor. I never pretended to be poor. You decided that modest clothes meant an empty bank account. You let us struggle. I helped you repeatedly. Not enough. There it was, the belief beneath every insult and demand. Nothing I gave would ever be enough because Natalie did not see it as generosity. She saw it as a fraction of what she believed she deserved. Ethan moved toward the door. Come on, Natalie. She followed him into the hallway, then turned toward me with a look of pure contempt. If you destroy this loan, don't expect to be welcome in our home again. You won't be invited to holidays, birthdays, or anything else. You will not be part of this family. I waited for Ethan to contradict her. He opened the front door. He did not defend me. He did not apologize. He did not ask Natalie to take back the threat. He simply walked outside. As the door closed behind them, I understood the choice my son had made. Natalie had offered him a future built on my surrender, and Ethan had chosen to follow her into it. The silence that filled my house afterward was different from the silence of widowhood. Michael had been taken from me. Ethan had walked away willingly. The account that should not exist. I did not sleep that night. After Ethan and Natalie left, I remained in the living room with only the lamp beside Michael's chair burning. Their final words replayed in my mind until they seemed to belong to the house itself. You will not be part of this family. At 68, I had learned that silence was not always peaceful. Sometimes it was the sound left behind when someone withdrew their love to punish you. By 8:30 the next morning, I was dressed in a gray wool suit and sitting in Laura Mitchell's office at First Heritage Bank. I had replaced the navy dress, but not because Natalie had shamed me. I folded it carefully and placed it back in my closet beside Michael's anniversary card. Richard arrived carrying a locked document case. Laura sat opposite me with a yellow legal pad, her expression calm but serious. I received your email, she said. Ethan's access was suspended first thing this morning. What access did he have? Annual summaries and general performance reports. Nothing that should have allowed him to authorize transactions. Could he see individual property values? Not the complete list attached to that loan. Richard placed the sealed restaurant documents on the table. That is what concerns us. A compliance officer named Denise Harper joined the meeting. She connected her laptop to a large screen and opened the commercial loan file for Bellamy and Rowe Holdings. The application process had begun 6 months earlier. At first, the information appeared ordinary. Natalie was listed as the majority owner. Ethan was named as a secondary guarantor. The business plan described a luxury boutique targeting professional women in Central Ohio. Then, Denise opened the section identifying additional financial support. My name appeared there, Sophie Bernard, controlling trustee. My home address, date of birth, and partial social security number were displayed beneath it. A cold sensation spread through my chest. Where did they get this information? We're tracing that now, Denise replied. She opened the first personal financial statement submitted under my name. It listed several trust properties, investment accounts, and estimated annual income. The document contained mistakes, but the numbers were close enough to seem legitimate. According to the submission history, someone had uploaded 3 revised versions over 4 months. Each one added more of my assets. Were any of these sent from my email, I asked. Denise displayed the address. At first glance, it looked correct. Then Laura leaned closer. There's an extra letter. My real email address contained my first initial and surname. The fraudulent address repeated the final letter in Bernard. It was the kind of difference most people would miss when reading quickly. The false address had responded to verification requests, confirmed receipt of disclosures, and approved the release of financial information. Someone had written messages pretending to be me. I read one aloud. I trust my son and daughter-in-law completely and am pleased to support their new business venture. My hands began to shake. The sentence sounded nothing like me, but it had been used to turn my identity into a tool. Why didn't anyone call me sooner? I asked. Richard's face showed genuine regret. The file was initially handled through standard commercial channels. The discrepancies were flagged when the final guarantee reached verification. That is why you received yesterday's voicemail. Denise opened another screen. We also discovered an account connected to the application. The account was registered under the name Bellamy and Rowe Development Services. Natalie was listed as an authorized signer. Ethan's name appeared as a secondary contact. I had never heard of it. Over the previous year, I had transferred money to Ethan several times. He told me the funds were needed for home repairs, property taxes, and unexpected medical expenses. Some of that money had entered this account. From there, the funds had been divided into smaller payments. There were charges from designer clothing stores, a luxury car rental company, a resort in Florida, and a furniture showroom in Chicago. Another payment covered the deposit on Bellamy and Rowe's proposed retail space. I stared at a charge for more than $8,000 from a jewelry store. Ethan had called me 2 days before that purchase and said their furnace had failed. How much of my money passed through this account? I asked. Denise gave me the figure. More than $70,000. The amount itself hurt less than the lies attached to it. I remembered Ethan telling me the upstairs pipes had burst. I remembered Natalie claiming an emergency dental procedure was not fully covered by insurance. I remembered sending money quickly because family I believed should not have to prove every hardship. Laura touched my arm. Would you like to take a break? No, I want to see everything. Denise opened the signature history. The false guarantee contained a digital copy of my name taken from an estate document signed 2 years earlier. The image had been resized and placed on the commercial application. The source document was the same estate update Ethan referenced in my living room. Someone with access to a copy had extracted my signature. Could Ethan have obtained that document? I asked. Laura hesitated. A courtesy copy was sent to him because he was listed as successor trustee at the time. My throat tightened. Richard spoke carefully. That does not prove he created the signature, but it proves he had access. Yes. Denise explained that the bank would preserve all electronic records and determine which devices and internet addresses had been used. Because the documents involved identity theft and a multi-million-dollar loan, First Heritage was required to open a formal investigation. What happens next? I asked. The loan remains frozen, Richard said. The bank's fraud department will conduct an internal review. Depending on what we find, we may be required to notify law enforcement. The words law enforcement changed the room. I pictured Ethan being questioned at work. I imagined neighbors watching official cars outside his home. Even after everything, my first instinct was to protect him. Is there a way to resolve this privately? Laura placed her pen down. Sophie, you are not the only person at risk. She reminded me that the pledged properties housed families. The trust also supported maintenance workers, contractors, and community programs. If the fraudulent guarantee had been accepted and the boutique failed, the consequences could reach far beyond my personal finances. Silence would not protect Ethan, she said. It would protect whoever did this. I looked at the screen again. My name appeared above a statement claiming I had willingly pledged the work of my entire life. For years, I had rescued Ethan before consequences reached him. I paid bills, solved emergencies, and accepted apologies that required no change. But this was no forgotten payment or careless decision. Someone had created an email in my name, copied my signature, accessed private financial information, and used my trust to support a $2.4 million loan. Richard closed the file. There is one more issue, he said. The account activity suggests someone connected to Bellamy and Rowe has been preparing for this application for at least 6 months. This was not done in panic the night before closing. Laura looked at me. You need to decide whether you will cooperate fully, even if the evidence leads to Ethan. I thought of my son as a little boy beneath my cutting table. Then I remembered the adult man who knew my home was being offered as collateral and still asked me to sign. My eyes filled with tears, but my voice remained steady. Find out who used my name. Richard nodded. Laura reopened her legal pad, and as the investigation began, I understood that the truth might cost me the son I had spent a lifetime trying to save, the woman who kept the copies. I had just returned home from the bank when an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. Normally, I allowed unknown callers to leave a message. That afternoon, however, every unanswered question felt dangerous. Hello? For several seconds, no one spoke. Then a woman said, Is this Mrs. Sophie Bernard? Yes. My name is Hannah Brooks. I used to handle bookkeeping for Bellamy and Rowe. I saw what happened at Hawthorne Grill last night. I tightened my grip on the phone. How did you hear about that? One of the investors called me. He wanted to know whether I had created the documents Mr. Whitmore took. Did you? No. Her answer came immediately. But Natalie is going to say I did. Her voice trembled. I asked where she was calling from. My car. I didn't want to make this call from home. Natalie knows where I live, and I don't know what she might do if she realizes I kept copies. What copies? Emails, invoices, draft applications, notes from meetings. I sat down at the kitchen table. Why did you keep them? Because I knew something was wrong. Hannah explained that Natalie hired her 8 months earlier to organize the boutique's expenses and prepare records for the commercial loan. At first, the work seemed legitimate. Hannah reviewed vendor estimates, lease expenses, and projected sales. Then Natalie began asking her to adjust the numbers. She wanted projected revenue presented as existing income, Hannah said. She told me everyone did it when launching a business. Did Ethan know? He attended some meetings, but Natalie usually spoke for both of them. The distinction was not comforting. Hannah continued. 3 months into the job, Natalie sent her a spreadsheet containing properties held by the Bernard Family Trust. She instructed Hannah to add them to the financial support section of the loan application. I asked for documentation proving Ethan had authority over those assets, Hannah said. Natalie told me he would inherit everything anyway. Inheriting something one day does not give him control today. That's what I said. Natalie insisted the arrangement had already been discussed with me. She claimed I was elderly, disliked paperwork, and wanted Ethan to handle the details. Hannah asked to speak with me directly. Natalie refused. She said you became confused during financial conversations and might accidentally contradict what you had already agreed to. The cruelty of that lie settled heavily inside me. Natalie had not only used my name, she had used my age to prevent anyone from verifying my consent. What happened after you refused? I asked. She started removing me from meetings. Hannah later discovered that several financial statements had been changed after she prepared them. Property values were added, expense figures were reduced, and my name appeared as a guarantor. When she confronted Natalie, she was told to stop asking questions. She said my job was to make the file presentable, not to judge how a family managed its money. Hannah began saving copies because she feared the alterations would be traced back to her computer. 2 weeks later, Natalie fired her for poor performance. Mrs. Bernard. I've been terrified she would blame me. When I heard she used my name at the restaurant, I knew I couldn't stay quiet. I called Laura and asked her to join the conversation. Within an hour, Hannah agreed to meet us at Laura's office. She arrived carrying a laptop and a thick red folder pressed tightly against her chest. She was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a plain gray coat. She looked like someone who had been carrying fear alone for too long. Laura assured her that preserving evidence had been the right decision. Hannah opened the first email. The sender was Natalie. Add Bernard Family Trust assets under supplemental guarantor. Ethan will have control eventually, and Sophie has already agreed. Another message instructed Hannah to use the property figures from an attached report. Laura examined the attachment. This resembles an annual trust summary, she said. It contained more detail than Ethan should have been sharing, but less than the complete information found in the final application. Someone had combined it with another source. Hannah showed us draft after draft. In early versions, my name did not appear. Later, I was listed as a financial supporter. Eventually, the language changed to controlling guarantor. The transformation had taken place gradually, one dishonest addition at a time. Then Hannah opened an email chain between Natalie and a private technology consultant. The subject line read, "Client Verification Setup." The consultant had created the email address that closely imitated mine. Attached to the message was a cropped image of my signature. My stomach turned. "Where did she get that?" I whispered. Hannah opened another file. It was the estate document Laura had sent Ethan 2 years earlier. The signature had been cut directly from the final page. Laura's expression hardened. "This establishes the source." A message from Natalie appeared beneath the attachment. "Make it clean enough for digital submission. Sophie never checks email closely, and Ethan says she signs whatever he puts in front of her." I closed my eyes. Hannah touched the edge of the folder. "There are other messages you should see." Several were exchanges between Natalie and a marketing consultant. They were not necessary to prove financial fraud, but they revealed how Natalie spoke about me when I was absent. "The old woman dresses like she's waiting for a church rummage sale." Another said, "Once the store opens, we can keep her away from events. She's useful only because of the property." I had believed her insults at dinner were reckless words spoken under pressure. These messages showed something worse. Her contempt was not impulsive. It was habitual. Then Laura found an email from Ethan. It had been sent 6 weeks earlier in response to a revised collateral schedule. "I know Mom's house is listed. Don't show her the full property page at first. She'll panic before we can explain that the risk is temporary." My heart seemed to stop. There was no forged signature in his message. There was no proof he had created the false email. But he knew my home was being used, and he had agreed to hide that fact from me. A second email from Ethan read, "Get everything ready and mark only the pages she needs to sign. I'll make sure she comes to dinner." Hannah looked down. "I'm sorry." I reread the words until they blurred. My son had not created the fraudulent documents, but he had helped design the moment when they would be placed before me. He knew I would refuse if I understood the truth, so he planned to limit what I saw. Laura printed the messages and placed each page in an evidence folder. "This substantially strengthens the bank's case against Natalie," she said. "It also shows Ethan knowingly participated in an attempt to obtain your signature through deception." "Will he be charged?" "That depends on what else the investigation finds and whether he cooperates." I thought of Ethan standing in my living room, insisting he had only made a mistake. A mistake was forgetting a birthday. A mistake was missing a payment. This had been a plan. Natalie had created the false identity, copied my signature, and manipulated the application. But Ethan had supplied trust information and helped arrange the ambush at dinner. He had not stolen my name with his own hands. He had simply opened the door and allowed his wife to walk through it. Laura asked whether I still wanted the bank to continue. I looked at the email instructing them to hide the property page from me. "Yes," I said. The answer broke something inside me, but I did not take it back. That evening, as I left Laura's office, one question followed me into the cold. If telling the truth destroyed Ethan's life, would I finally allow him to face the consequences, or would I rescue my son one more time? Natalie came to my door. The following evening, Natalie sent me a message shortly after 7. We need to talk alone. No bankers, no lawyers, just family. I showed it to Laura, who had come to my house with copies of the documents Hannah provided. She knows Hannah contacted us, Laura said. Someone from the bank may have requested additional records from Bellamy and Rowe. Should I answer? Laura considered the question. You are not obligated to meet with her, but if you decide to, you should not be alone. I replied that I would be home for another hour. I did not tell Natalie that Laura would remain in the den close enough to hear the conversation. It was not a trap. After seeing the forged documents and the cruelty in Natalie's emails, I no longer felt safe meeting her without a witness. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across my living room wall. Natalie knocked once and entered before I could reach the door. Ethan was not with her. She wore jeans, a black sweater, and no visible jewelry. Without the designer dress and carefully arranged hair, she looked younger and more tired. Her eyes were red, and for a moment I saw fear instead of arrogance. Sophie, please, she said, you have to stop this. I remained beside the doorway. You entered my house without being invited. I'm sorry. She stepped back onto the porch and waited. Only then did I open the door fully. Natalie walked into the living room and looked around at the furniture she had often called outdated. Her gaze paused on the family photographs along the mantel. Ethan appeared in nearly all of them. I didn't know the trust was worth so much, she began. That is not an apology. I'm trying to explain. Then explain the false email address. She looked down. Our consultant created it to keep the application organized. In my name. It wasn't meant to steal anything. Then explained the signature taken from my estate document. David said electronic signatures were common. Did David say you could use one without my consent? She pressed her lips together. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then her shoulders began to shake. The store is everything I've worked for, she whispered. If the bank reports this, it's over. The lease, the investors, my reputation, everything. You should have considered that before using my identity. I thought you would sign. You knew I had not, but I believed you would once Ethan explained. That does not give you permission to pretend I already had. Natalie wiped her eyes. I wanted to feel sympathy. Perhaps part of me did, but I remembered her messages describing me as useful only because of the property. You can fix this, she said. Tell Richard there was a misunderstanding. Say you gave verbal permission, but the paperwork was processed incorrectly. You want me to lie? You wouldn't be lying. You've always supported Ethan. Supporting my son is not the same as guaranteeing your loan. Her sorrow disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. If the investigation continues, Ethan could lose his job. Why his employer won't keep a project manager accused of financial fraud. No one forced him to hide the collateral schedule from me. He was protecting our marriage. No, he was protecting himself from having to tell you no. Natalie stood and began pacing. You have no idea what kind of pressure he's under. He has spent years trying to satisfy you. I almost could not believe what I was hearing. I paid his student debt and helped buy your house, and you made sure he felt grateful every time. I never asked him to repay me. You didn't have to. You sat in this house with all that money while we struggled. You rented luxury cars and took trips with money Ethan requested for emergencies. Her head snapped toward me. You saw the account. Yes. Then you know everything we spent was connected to building the brand. Was the jewelry store purchase connected to the brand? She did not answer. I moved closer to the mantel and picked up a photograph of Ethan at his college graduation. Michael stood on one side of him, and I stood on the other. "You keep talking about what this investigation may cost you," I said. "You haven't asked what your actions cost me." Natalie folded her arms. "You're enjoying the power now. Richard knows your name, the bank protects you, and suddenly everyone sees how important you are. Richard knew my name before you mocked my dress." "That's not what I meant." "It is exactly what you meant. You respected me only after discovering what I controlled." Her face hardened. "If you continue this, people will learn the truth about you too." "What truth?" "That you're wealthy. That you watched your son worry about bills while pretending to live on a pension. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother does that." The threat was clear. Natalie intended to turn her deception into a public story about my selfishness. "Tell whoever you like," I said. "My financial privacy is not a crime." "But fraud is," Laura said from the doorway. Natalie spun around. Laura entered the living room carrying her legal pad. "You said no lawyers. You entered my home and attempted to persuade me to give a false statement," I replied. "I needed a witness." Natalie's hand moved toward her purse. I noticed the top of her phone protruding from an open pocket, its screen glowing red. Laura noticed it too. "Are you recording this conversation?" she asked. Natalie quickly pulled out the phone and stopped the recording. "I wanted proof that Sophie was threatening us." "The only person who made a threat was you," Laura said. "And your recording may have preserved it." Natalie's face reddened. Laura handed her a business card. "From this point forward, all communication concerning the loan Bernard Family Trust or Mrs. Bernard's statement must come through my office. You can't keep a mother from speaking to her son." "I'm not. I'm preventing you from pressuring my client about an active fraud investigation." Natalie shoved the card into her purse. At the front door, she paused. "You think Ethan will survive this because Sophie has money," she said. "He won't." "What does that mean?" I asked. She gave a bitter laugh. "The trust wasn't the only collateral. Ethan signed a secondary guarantee against our house." My chest tightened. "Does he know? He knows he signed something? He doesn't understand that the lender can take the house if the boutique fails." Even Laura looked surprised. "You concealed that from your husband?" I asked. "I was going to tell him after the store opened." "That is the same excuse you used for concealing the truth from me." Natalie opened the door. "If the loan dies, we lose everything. When Ethan discovers you could have prevented it, he will blame you for the rest of his life." She walked out and slammed the door behind her. Through the window, I watched her car disappear down the street. Laura stood beside me. "Ethan needs independent legal counsel." I looked again at his graduation photograph. My son had betrayed me, but he had also been deceived by his wife. Natalie had placed his home at risk without explaining the consequences, just as they had tried to do with mine. The difference was that Ethan had helped her deceive me. Now, without knowing it, he had become her next victim. Ched letter. Michael left behind. After Laura left, I carried Ethan's graduation photograph upstairs and placed it on my bedroom dresser. In the picture, he was 22 years old. His smile was wide and unguarded, and his arm rested across Michael's shoulders. At that age, Ethan still believed responsibility meant keeping promises and earning what he wanted. I wondered when fear had become stronger than those values. Natalie had deceived him about their house, but that did not erase what he had done to me. Both truths could exist at once. My son had been manipulated, and he had also chosen to participate in manipulating his mother. Laura asked me to locate the original estate documents Michael and I signed 2 years before his death. The forged signature had been taken from one of those pages, and she wanted to compare every copy distributed at the time. I went to the small storage room beside my bedroom. At the back of the closet sat a heavy metal box Michael bought after we created the trust. It was protected by a key and a combination. The key remained inside a ceramic sewing jar, exactly where I had kept it for years. The combination was our wedding date. Inside were property deeds, old insurance policies, Michael's military records, and several sealed envelopes arranged in his careful handwriting. Beneath the trust documents, I found a smaller envelope with my name on it. Sophie read this when loving Ethan makes it difficult to see clearly. My hands became still. I had never seen the envelope before. Michael must have placed it there during the final months of his illness, when he spent long afternoons organizing papers he feared I would one day have to face alone. I sat on the floor beside the open box and broke the seal. My dearest Sophie, if you are reading this, then our son has made a decision that your heart wants to excuse before your mind fully understands it. I covered my mouth with one hand. Michael's voice seemed to rise from the page. He wrote that Ethan had always been kind, intelligent, and eager to please. Those qualities made him lovable, but they also created a weakness. Ethan feared rejection so deeply that he sometimes surrendered his judgment to whoever threatened to withdraw approval. Michael described an incident from Ethan's final year of college. Our son allowed a friend to use his name on a rental agreement because he was afraid the group would exclude him. When the apartment was damaged, Ethan lied about his involvement until Michael uncovered the truth. I remembered the incident, but I had forgotten how it ended. I paid the debt. Michael had wanted Ethan to take a second job and reimburse the landlord himself. I argued that one mistake should not burden the beginning of his adult life. Eventually, Michael gave in. In his letter, he admitted that he should have insisted. "You have always loved by protecting," he wrote. "It is one of the most beautiful things about you." But protection can become a hiding place where the person we love never learns to stand. Tears fell onto the page. He warned me that money would make the problem more dangerous. If Ethan ever believed his parents' resources could erase every consequence, he might confuse being loved with being rescued. Do not give him money simply because he is frightened. Do not carry a burden he willingly placed on someone else. Listen to the truth, but require him to speak it completely. If he loses something because of his choices, let the loss teach what our words could not. I paused and pressed the letter against my chest. For years, I had believed helping Ethan was an expression of faith in him. But perhaps I had been expressing faith in my own ability to repair everything. Whenever he fell behind, I paid. Whenever he made a poor decision, I softened the consequences. Whenever Natalie insulted me, I remained quiet because I feared Ethan would feel forced to choose between us. And when that choice finally came, he followed her out of my house. Michael's final paragraph was shorter. You may have to love him from a distance for a while. Distance is not abandonment when it protects what is right. If he returns with honesty instead of excuses, leave the door open, but do not carry him through it. I read those lines several times. By then, I was crying too hard to see clearly. I wish you were here, I whispered. The house did not answer. Yet the letter felt like Michael's hand resting over mine, steadying me before I made a decision he had known might come. The following morning, I brought the original estate papers and the letter to Laura's office. I did not show her every word Michael had written. Some parts belonged only to us, but I told her what I had decided. I will cooperate fully with the bank. Laura nodded. Even if the evidence implicates Ethan, yes. And if law enforcement becomes involved? I took a breath. Yes. The answer did not mean I wanted my son punished. It meant I would no longer obstruct the truth to protect him from it. I asked whether there was any legal way to distinguish between Natalie's deliberate fraud and Ethan's role in concealing information. The evidence already shows a distinction, Laura said. Natalie appears to have created the false identity and signature. Ethan appears to have assisted in obtaining your real signature through deception. His cooperation could matter significantly. Then tell him that. You want me to contact him? I want him offered one opportunity to tell the complete truth. No secret arrangement and no promise that there will be no consequences. Laura agreed to recommend that Ethan obtain independent counsel before meeting investigators. Then we discussed the trust. Ethan remained listed as successor trustee, meaning he could eventually assume control if I died or became incapacitated. After seeing the email in which he instructed Natalie to hide the collateral page, I could no longer leave that arrangement unchanged. I signed a temporary amendment removing him from the successor position while the investigation continued. Laura would serve as interim successor trustee. I also froze all financial support to Ethan. No more transfers for repairs taxes, business expenses, or emergencies. Any genuine medical crisis could be reviewed independently, but he would no longer receive money simply by calling me with a frightening story. Signing those instructions hurt more than writing any check ever had. It feels like I'm abandoning him, I admitted. Laura looked at me with compassion. You are refusing to abandon yourself. When I returned home, Ethan's car was parked across the street. He stepped out as I approached my front door. He looked exhausted, his face unshaven, and his shirt wrinkled. Mom, Natalie told me you know about the house. I do. She lied to me. Yes. He followed me onto the porch. I didn't know what I signed. I turned toward him. You expected me to accept that explanation while you refused to accept it from me. He lowered his head. Laura said, I need a lawyer. You do. Are you really cooperating with the investigation? Yes. His eyes filled with fear. I'm your son, and I am your mother. You used that relationship to bring me to a dinner where you planned to hide the truth until I signed. I was trying to save my marriage. You were asking me to sacrifice my security so you would not have to confront your wife. He stared at the porch floor. What do you want me to do? Michael's words returned to me. If he returns with honesty instead of excuses, leave the door open. Tell the truth, I said. All of it. Not the version that saves Natalie, not the version that saves you. The truth. And then you accept whatever follows. I entered the house and closed the door gently. For the first time in Ethan's life, I did not offer to fix what came next. The meeting where every lie broke. The formal meeting took place 3 days later in the largest conference room at First Heritage Bank. Laura sat on my right. Richard sat at the far end of the polished table with 2 members of the bank's legal and fraud departments. Ethan arrived with an attorney named Mark Henderson, a quiet man who appeared more interested in facts than excuses. Natalie entered last. She wore a charcoal suit and carried the same designer handbag she had displayed at Hawthorne Grill. David Mercer, the attorney whose name appeared on the dinner documents, walked beside her. Natalie did not look at me when she sat down. Richard opened the meeting. The purpose of today's discussion is to review the disputed commercial loan application, identify the source of the unauthorized financial information, and allow the involved parties to respond before the bank completes its report. David immediately raised a hand. My client denies creating any fraudulent documents. Bellamy and Rowe relied on materials prepared by independent contractors and its former bookkeeper. Do you mean Hannah Brooks? Laura asked. She controlled the financial files. That is not true, I said. Natalie finally looked at me. You have heard one side of the story from a disgruntled employee. I heard your instructions in your own words. Her confidence flickered, but did not disappear. David opened a folder. Mrs. Bernard, my client believes she had your verbal support. Any irregularity in the signature process resulted from administrative confusion, not criminal intent. Did administrative confusion create an email address in my name? The address was created to organize communications, without telling me. Natalie was under the impression Ethan had discussed it with you. Every answer shifted responsibility to someone else. Richard signaled to the fraud officer who displayed a timeline on the conference room screen. The first commercial application did not mention me. 2 months later, my name appeared as a potential supporter. Then came the trust properties, the false email, and finally, the copied signature. Each step corresponded with messages sent from Natalie's accounts. David objected that the messages lacked context. Laura placed several printed emails on the table. "What context makes this sentence acceptable?" she asked. She read Natalie's instruction aloud. "Make it clean enough for digital submission. Sophie never checks email closely." Ethan closed his eyes. Natalie leaned toward her attorney. "That message referred to formatting, and the attached image of my signature," I asked. "I thought it was being used as a reference." "For what?" She had no answer. David claimed Hannah might have manipulated the records after being fired. Richard looked toward the conference room door. "Then perhaps Ms. Brooks should respond personally." The door opened. Hannah entered carrying the red folder and her laptop. A bank investigator accompanied her. Natalie's composure shattered. "She has no right to be here. She was invited because you identified her as responsible," Richard said. Hannah sat across from Natalie. Her hands trembled as she connected the laptop, but her voice remained steady. "I preserved the original files because Mrs. Bernard's information was added after I refused to certify it." She displayed the email metadata. The records showed when each message was sent, which accounts created the attachments, and how the documents changed. One file contained a note from Natalie. "Do not send this version to Sophie. We only need her to see the signature pages." Another message instructed Hannah to list the trust properties under family-controlled collateral, even though Ethan had no authority over them. Natalie pointed at Ethan. "He gave me those reports." Ethan's eyes opened. "You said your attorney confirmed we could use them. You knew they were your mother's assets. I knew you wanted her to guarantee the loan. I didn't know you had already submitted her signature." Natalie laughed bitterly. "So now you're the innocent son I didn't say I was innocent." The room became silent. Mark Ethan's attorney placed a hand near his client's arm, but Ethan continued. "I knew Mom's house was on the collateral schedule. I knew she would refuse if she saw everything immediately. I told Natalie to mark only the signature pages." Hearing him confess hurt, even though I had already read the evidence. Ethan looked at me. "I thought we could explain after the boutique opened. I believed once the business succeeded, there would be no risk." "You believed success would excuse deception," I said. "Yes." His voice broke. "I was wrong." Natalie stared at him. "Tell them you approved the email account." "I didn't. You knew we needed verification. I thought you had another way to complete it after Mom signed. You sent me the estate document." "Yes, because you said the attorney needed proof of who the successor trustee was. I did not tell you to copy her signature." Natalie turned to Richard. "He is lying to protect himself." Ethan's face hardened. "No, Natalie. I spent months lying to protect you." She recoiled as though he had struck her. Ethan admitted that he helped arrange the dinner because the investors would be present. Natalie believed I would not create a scene in front of strangers. Ethan agreed because he feared that if the loan failed, she would blame him for destroying her dream. "I told myself Mom would be safe," he said. "I told myself the boutique would succeed and the guarantee would never matter. And when Natalie mocked my clothes, I asked." His eyes filled with tears. "I was ashamed. Of me? No. Of what we were doing. But I was too much of a coward to admit it. I had imagined many explanations for his silence. None made it hurt less. The dress was not what wounded me most," I said. "It was watching my son decide that defending me might inconvenience his plan." Ethan lowered his head. "I know." Natalie pushed her chair back. "This is ridiculous." Sophie manipulated this entire situation. She hid her wealth. Let us believe she had nothing. And now she is using the bank to punish us. I looked directly at her. You did not need to know my net worth to understand that my signature belonged to me. You were going to leave everything to Ethan eventually. Eventually is not ownership. You never gave him a real chance. I gave him money, patience, and trust. You treated all three as weaknesses. David whispered for Natalie to stop speaking, but she ignored him. She pointed toward Ethan. He wanted the money as much as I did. He knew exactly what we were doing. Ethan stared at the woman he had defended against me. Then he reached into his briefcase and removed his phone tablet and a small external drive. I'm turning these over voluntarily, he said. They contain every message draft and account file I have. Natalie went pale. You can't do that. I already signed the consent forms. You're destroying our marriage. He looked at her for a long moment. No, I helped destroy it when I agreed to lie. I'm just refusing to keep lying now. The bank investigator collected the devices. Richard explained that Ethan's cooperation would be documented, but it would not erase his involvement. Ethan nodded as though he finally understood that honesty was not a bargain for immediate forgiveness. Natalie gathered her handbag. If he gives you those messages, I want it recorded that he acted without my permission. Laura's expression was almost pitying. That is the first time in this entire case you have objected to someone using something without your consent. Natalie froze. No one spoke as she left the room, with David following behind her. Ethan remained seated, staring at his empty hands. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I wanted to reach across the table. I wanted to tell him everything would be all right, as I had done throughout his childhood. Instead, I remembered Michael's letter. I left my hands folded in my lap. I believe you are sorry, I said. Now you must become someone whose actions make those words true. For the first time, Ethan did not ask me to save him. He simply nodded and accepted what came next. The price of being seen. First Heritage Bank officially denied the Bellamy and Rowe loan the following week. Without the financing, Natalie could not complete the lease, pay the contractors, or order the inventory she had promised investors would arrive within the month. The Lawsons withdrew their support after reviewing the evidence. Kevin Doyle ended his involvement, and the interior designer demanded payment for work already completed. The boutique that Natalie had described as certain never opened its doors. For weeks, the proposed storefront remained covered with paper bearing the gold Bellamy and Rowe logo. Then the landlord removed the sign. By spring, another business had leased the space. The failure of the boutique was only the beginning. The bank's investigation established that Natalie had directed the creation of the false email address and submitted the copied signature. Records from Ethan's devices supported his statement that he had not created those items, but they also confirmed his participation in withholding information from me. The county prosecutor reviewed the evidence. Because no loan funds had been released, Natalie's attorney negotiated rather than force the case through a long trial. She accepted responsibility for identity fraud, falsifying financial information, and attempting to secure credit through unauthorized documents. The agreement required her to repay the money diverted through the development account, complete a period of supervised probation, and perform community service with a financial education program. She was also prohibited from managing another person's financial information during that period. Some people believed the consequences were too gentle. Others thought losing her business reputation and marriage was punishment enough. I learned that justice rarely arrives in a form that satisfies everyone. It does not undo the harm. It simply makes the person who caused it carry some of its weight. Ethan avoided criminal charges for forgery because the evidence supported his claim that he had not created the false signature. His voluntary cooperation mattered. Still, he was not declared innocent of everything. He had concealed the collateral schedule, provided Natalie with trust reports, and helped arrange the dinner where they planned to pressure me. The bank permanently removed him from any role connected to the trust accounts. His employer placed him on administrative leave while reviewing the case. When he returned, he lost his supervisory position and was reassigned to less sensitive projects. 2 weeks after the meeting, Ethan separated from Natalie. He moved into the guest room at a friend's house, while their attorneys untangled the debts. The large home I helped them purchase had become impossible to keep. Even though the Bellamy and Rowe loan was never funded, Ethan had signed other obligations connected to the lease contractors and preliminary business expenses. Natalie had used their house to support those commitments without explaining the full risk. When the bills arrived, they had 2 options: fall further behind or sell. One rainy afternoon, Ethan came to my house carrying a folder from his attorney. He stood in the kitchen where he once asked me to sign the power of attorney. "We have an offer on the house," he said. "Is it enough to cover what you owe, most of it? What happens to the rest, I'll have to make payments for several years." I nodded. He stared at his hands. "If I could cover the difference now, I might be able to keep the house." The familiar ache returned to my chest. "How much do you need?" He named a figure larger than the down payment I had originally provided. I thought of the checkbook in the desk drawer. I could have written the amount without endangering my future. The trust could have preserved the house with one transfer. For most of Ethan's life, that fact would have ended the conversation. But Michael's letter had changed what love required of me. "I won't lend you the money," I said. Ethan's eyes filled with disappointment. "I would sign a repayment agreement. This is not about whether you could repay me. Then what is it about you chose to sign obligations you did not understand? You helped conceal my risks while ignoring your own. If I remove every consequence again, you will learn nothing except that your mother's money is still the last door you can open." He looked toward the window. "I don't want to lose the house. I understand. You helped us buy it. That does not make me responsible for saving it." For a moment, I expected anger. Instead, Ethan slowly nodded. "My therapist said you might say that." I looked at him in surprise. "You're seeing someone twice a week." He explained that Mark, his attorney, recommended counseling after the bank meeting. Ethan had begun examining why he feared conflict and why he allowed Natalie's approval to determine his choices. "I kept telling myself I was protecting my marriage," he said, "but I was really protecting myself from being alone." I poured coffee for both of us. "I'm glad you're getting help. That doesn't mean you forgive me." "No." He winced, but I continued. "It means I see you doing something different. Forgiveness cannot be demanded because you have begun changing." I know. The house sold the following month. Ethan paid the remaining obligations through a structured agreement and moved into a modest 1-bedroom apartment near his office. He sold his expensive vehicle and bought a used sedan. He also took weekend work supervising maintenance projects for a small property company. The irony was not lost on either of us. He was finally doing the kind of practical work Michael once performed. Each month, Ethan deposited money into a restitution account managed through Laura's office. He did not ask how quickly those payments might restore his place in the trust. That mattered to me. One Friday afternoon, he came by to repair a loose porch step. After finishing, he sat beside me with sawdust on his sleeves. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "Not because I lost the house. Not because the store failed. I'm sorry because I used your love as something I could spend." I looked at him for a long time. "I still love you. I know. But love and trust are not the same thing." His eyes lowered. "Can trust come back?" "Yes," I said, "but not because you ask for it. Because you live honestly long enough for me to feel safe believing you." He nodded without arguing. Later that week, Richard invited me to his office. The bank's case file had been formally closed, and the Bernard family trust accounts were secure. Before I left, he opened a small wooden box. Inside was the black pen Natalie had placed beside my hand at Hawthorne Grill. The restaurant manager found it after the documents were sealed, Richard said. I thought it belonged to you. I picked it up. It was an ordinary pen, yet it represented the decision that had changed everything. One signature could have placed my home, my properties, and Michael's life's work at risk. One refusal had exposed years of manipulation. Richard smiled gently. Sometimes the most important thing we do with a pen is decide not to use it. I closed the box and carried it home. That evening, I placed it beside Michael's letter. For most of my life, I believed strength meant giving my family whatever they needed. At 68, I finally understood that sometimes strength meant loving them enough to let them pay the price of their own choices. The dress at the head of the table. 1 year after the dinner at Hawthorne Grill, I stood in front of the same bedroom closet and reached for the navy dress. I had not worn it since the night Natalie mocked me. For months, merely touching the fabric brought back the laughter Ethan's silence and the pen waiting beside fraudulent documents. But that morning, when I lifted the dress from its hanger, I remembered something more important. Michael had loved me in it. Natalie's cruelty did not deserve the power to replace that memory. I put on the dress, fastened my pearl earrings, and studied my reflection. The silver trim still rested neatly against my collar. The fabric showed its age, but so did I, and neither of us had anything to apologize for. That afternoon, the Bernard Financial Safety Initiative officially opened its doors. The program grew from conversations I had with Laura and Richard after the investigation. We realized that what happened to me was not unusual. Older women were frequently pressured into signing guarantees, changing deeds, sharing account access, or surrendering control to relatives who claimed they only wanted to help. Many victims remained silent because they feared losing their children. I understood that fear intimately. The initiative offered free legal consultations, financial education, fraud, prevention, workshops, and confidential support. Bernard Family Trust funded the program's first 3 years, while First Heritage Bank provided meeting space and financial counselors. We held the opening reception in the bank's community hall. When I arrived, sunlight poured through the tall windows. White flowers decorated the tables, and framed photographs displayed the homes Michael and I had restored over the years. Hannah stood near the entrance, reviewing a checklist. After the investigation, she had received offers from several companies impressed by her courage. Instead, she accepted my invitation to become the initiative's financial manager. "You look beautiful," she said when she saw me. I smiled. "This dress has had an interesting year." She recognized it from my description of the dinner. "Then it deserves a better memory." "Yes," I said. "It does." We walked through the hall together. More than 100 guests were expected, including attorneys, bank employees, social workers, and women from community organizations across Columbus. At the back of the room, Ethan was arranging chairs. He wore a simple blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had arrived 2 hours early and asked where he could help. He did not introduce himself as my son or expect a seat near the stage. During the previous year, Ethan had continued therapy. He made every restitution payment on time and kept his weekend maintenance job even after his employer restored part of his former responsibilities. His apartment was small, his car was old, and his life no longer impressed the people Natalie once wanted to entertain. Yet he appeared calmer than I had seen him in years. He looked up and noticed my dress. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he set down the chair he was carrying. "You wore it." "I did." He walked toward me, stopping at a respectful distance. "I remember Dad loving that dress. So do I." His eyes became wet. At the restaurant, I knew what it meant to you. You told me the story when I was younger. I had forgotten that. Then why didn't you say anything? Because defending you would have forced me to admit that Natalie was wrong. And once I admitted that, I might have had to admit everything else. He looked down. I let you sit there alone because I was afraid of what telling the truth would cost me. It cost you more when you waited. I know. He did not ask for forgiveness. That was one of the clearest signs he was changing. His earlier apologies had always contained a request: save my house, protect my marriage, restore my place. This apology asked nothing from me. I am sorry, Mom, he said. For the paperwork, the lies, and the dinner. But most of all, I'm sorry I made you believe you had to choose between your dignity and having a son. My throat tightened. I never stopped loving you. I know. I just stopped behaving like someone worthy of that love. I touched his arm. You were always worthy of love. Trust is what you damaged. Do you think I'm rebuilding it? Yes. His face softened. Slowly, I added. A small smile appeared. Slowly is fair. He returned to arranging chairs while I helped Hannah greet the first guests. Shortly before the program began, Richard approached me holding a seating chart. There seems to be a mistake, he said. What kind of mistake? Your place is marked at the end of the head table. That's perfectly fine. No, it isn't. He moved my name card to the center seat. You built this program, Sophie. You belong at the head of the table. A year earlier, Natalie had hidden me behind flowers. Now I was being placed in the most visible position in the room, but the difference no longer felt like victory over her. I did not need a prominent seat to prove my value. Still, I accepted it because hiding had never protected me. As the hall filled, I noticed an empty chair beside mine. I looked toward Ethan, who was standing near the back wall. I picked up the empty name card and wrote his name. When he saw it, he hesitated. Are you sure? This is not your old place in the trust, I said. It is one chair beside your mother. He nodded. I understand. That mattered too. When the program began, Richard stepped to the podium. Many people in this room know Mrs. Sophie Bernard as a businesswoman, a community partner, and the controlling trustee of a family organization that has supported affordable housing in Columbus for decades. He paused. But today we recognize her for something more important. She turned a personal betrayal into protection for people who might otherwise face the same harm alone. The audience stood and applauded. I looked down at my navy dress and thought about the woman I had been at Hawthorne Grill. She had believed remaining quiet was the price of keeping her family. She had mistaken endurance for love and rescue for motherhood. When I reached the podium, I did not speak about Natalie's sentence or the value of the trust. I spoke about consent. Your age does not make your decisions less important, I told the audience. Your generosity does not make your property available to anyone who asks. And your love for your children does not require you to surrender your safety. In the front row, an elderly woman wiped tears from her cheeks. I continued. Sometimes the people we love will call our boundaries cruel, because those boundaries prevent them from using us. That does not make the boundaries wrong. When I finished, Ethan stood with everyone else. Afterward, a woman in her 70s approached me. Her daughter had been pressuring her to add a son-in-law to the deed of her home. She had almost agreed because she feared being excluded from her grandchildren's lives. After hearing you, she said, I'm going to speak with one of the lawyers before signing anything. In that moment, every painful part of the previous year found a purpose. As evening settled outside the windows, I returned to the head table. Ethan sat beside me, helping Hannah organize information packets. Richard spoke with guests nearby. I touched the sleeve of my dress. A year earlier, I believed the most surprising part of that terrible dinner was that the bank president knew my name. I had been wrong. The important lesson was not that Richard knew who I was. It was that I finally remembered who I was before anyone else needed to say my name. My lesson. There comes a time in many women's lives when love and self-respect seem to pull in opposite directions. We are taught to forgive, provide, protect, and keep the family together. Those can be beautiful qualities, but they become dangerous when someone uses them to make us surrender our voice. Sophie's story reminds us that kindness is not permission. Generosity is not a contract granting others control over our property, money, identity, or future. No matter our age, we have the right to ask questions, read every page, seek independent advice, and say no without apology. It also teaches us that rescuing someone is not always the same as loving them. When we erase every consequence, we may unintentionally help the person avoid responsibility. Sometimes the most loving choice is to step back and allow the truth to do the teaching we could not. Forgiveness does not require immediate reconciliation. Sophie could love Ethan while refusing to trust him with financial authority. She could leave the emotional door open without carrying him through it. Real trust returned gradually because Ethan changed his behavior, accepted loss, sought help, and stopped demanding that his mother repair his life. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: our worth does not increase when an important person recognizes us. Sophie was valuable before Richard Whitmore said her name. She was intelligent before Natalie discovered her wealth. She was beautiful before anyone praised her dress. If you had been in Sophie's place, would you have reported the fraud? Or would you have protected your son one more time? Please share your honest opinion in the comments. If this story reminded you of your own experience, tell us what boundary you wish you had set sooner. And if you believe older women deserve stories that honor their strength, dignity, and wisdom, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach someone who may need the courage to say, "My name, my home, and my future still belong to me."